Judge Richard Hall tapped his gavel with practiced precision. 30 years on the bench had given him a reputation for strictness and unwavering adherence to the letter of the law in the small town of Hillsbridge. The courtroom was quiet as people waited for the next case. Morning light filtered through tall windows, catching dust particles floating in the air. Case number 47293, Eleanor Peters. Parking violations, the bailiff announced. The woman who approached the bench stood tall and dignified. Eleanor Peters wore a simple but elegant navy dress. Her dark skin contrasted with the white marble of the courtroom. Her expression was calm but determined as she faced the judge. "Mrs. Peters, you have accumulated 7 parking tickets over the past 3 months, all unpaid. How do you plead?" Judge Hall asked without looking up from his paperwork. His silver hair caught the light as he shuffled the papers in front of him. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Eleanor replied firmly, her voice clear and confident in the quiet courtroom. Judge Hall finally looked up, his blue eyes narrowing slightly. He was a man who took pride in his work and believed rules existed for a reason. "The evidence shows your vehicle was photographed in clearly marked no parking zones on multiple occasions. These photographs have been submitted as evidence." "I understand that, Your Honor, but I would like to explain the circumstances," Eleanor said, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mrs. Peters, the law doesn't concern itself with circumstances. It concerns itself with facts. And the fact is, you broke the parking ordinances of this town repeatedly." Eleanor took a deep breath. "Your Honor, if I may, I work as a nurse at Hillsbridge Community Hospital. During the recent flood crisis, emergency vehicles needed the regular parking areas. Several of us staff members were instructed to park temporarily in those zones to keep the main lots clear for ambulances and emergency vehicles." A few people in the courtroom nodded in recognition of the terrible floods that had hit their town last month. 3 days of nonstop rain had caused the river to overflow, flooding homes and businesses. The hospital had been one of the few buildings on higher ground, becoming a shelter for many displaced residents. Judge Hall's expression didn't change. "Do you have documentation of this instruction? An official memo perhaps, or an email from hospital administration?" "I have witness statements from the hospital administrator and—" "Hearsay," Judge Hall interrupted. "Without official documentation from the town permitting exception to parking laws during the emergency, I have no choice but to find you guilty. The fine is $1,500. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. It was an unusually harsh fine for parking violations, and everyone knew it. "Your Honor, that seems excessive," Eleanor said, maintaining her composure despite the shock evident in her eyes. "The fine reflects the repeated nature of the violations," the judge responded coldly. Next case. "Sir, I would like to request a payment plan. As a nurse, The court doesn't arrange financing, Mrs. Peters. You have 30 days to pay in full or face additional penalties." Eleanor's shoulders dropped slightly, but she held her head high as she turned and walked back down the aisle. A few people reached out to touch her arm in support as she passed. She had helped many of them or their families during the flood crisis. That evening, Judge Hall attended the annual Hillsbridge Civic Leadership Dinner at the town hall. It was an event he'd attended for decades. Men in suits and women in formal dresses mingled over drinks before dinner. The judge smiled and shook hands with people he had known for years. The newly elected mayor William Thompson approached him, champagne glass in hand. He was younger than most previous mayors, in his early 40s, with a reputation for fresh ideas and community engagement. "Judge Hall, I don't believe you've met my wife yet," Mayor Thompson said, guiding a woman to his side. "She's been away at a nursing conference this past month." The judge extended his hand with a practiced smile that froze when he recognized Eleanor Peters from his courtroom earlier that day. "Eleanor Thompson," she said simply, taking his hand briefly. "Though you may know me as Eleanor Peters. I kept my professional name at the hospital." The realization hit Judge Hall like a physical blow. The woman he had treated so dismissively in court was married to the most powerful man in Hillsbridge. "Mrs. Thompson," he managed to say as the blood drained from his face. "I didn't realize." "Few do," she replied evenly. William and I prefer to keep our personal lives separate from our professional responsibilities. Mayor Thompson looked between them, sensing the tension. Have you two met before? Yes, Eleanor said with a calm smile. The judge heard my case regarding parking violations during the flood emergency. He issued me a $1,500 fine this morning. Mayor Thompson's smile faded as he looked from his wife to Judge Hall. $1,500? For parking tickets during the flood emergency? Judge Hall tugged at his collar, suddenly feeling very warm. Well, yes, but I was simply following the letter of the law. Mrs. Peters, that is, Mrs. Thompson, didn't have the proper documentation to prove she had permission to park in those zones. Eleanor touched her husband's arm gently. William, let's not discuss this here. Tonight is about celebrating the town's recovery efforts, not my parking tickets. The mayor nodded, but his eyes remained cool as they rested on the judge. Of course, dear. Perhaps we can discuss this another time, Judge Hall. As the couple moved away to greet other guests, Judge Hall stood frozen in place. For the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of unease about one of his rulings. He watched as Eleanor moved through the crowd with grace and warmth. Everyone seemed to know her. Business owners thanked her for her help during the flood, elderly residents reached for her hands with gratitude, and parents introduced their children to her with respect and admiration. She's quite remarkable, isn't she? He said, a voice beside him. Judge Hall turned to see Dr. Phillips, the director of Hillsbridge Community Hospital. The older doctor was watching Eleanor with obvious pride. Yes, she seems well-liked, Judge Hall said carefully. More than well-liked. She was our hero during the floods, Dr. Phillips said. Did you know she worked 48 hours straight when the river first burst its banks? When the hospital generator failed, she organized the staff to move critical patients to higher floors by hand. She carried an elderly man up 3 flights of stairs herself. Judge Hall swallowed hard. I wasn't aware. And when we ran out of parking because the ambulances were coming in non-stop, she was the one who organized the staff parking solution. She contacted Town Hall for permission. I was there when she made the call, but I suppose in all the chaos, the paperwork was never properly filed. The judge's discomfort grew. I see. When she finally took a break after 2 days, she found her own home had been flooded. She lost nearly everything. But she was back at work the next day. Dr. Phillips shook his head in admiration. People like Eleanor are rare, Judge. They're the heart of a community like ours. Throughout dinner, Judge Hall could hardly focus on his meal. He kept glancing at Eleanor, seated beside her husband at the head table. The weight of his harsh judgment earlier that day pressed on him. Had he become too rigid in his thinking? Too focused on rules and not enough on the people those rules were meant to serve? After dinner, Mayor Thompson clinked his glass for attention and stood to give a speech. He thanked various community members for their efforts during the flood crisis. When he mentioned the hospital staff, he asked Eleanor to stand and led a round of applause for her. Many of you don't know this, the mayor continued, but my wife refused to be evacuated from the hospital during the worst of the flooding, even when our own home was underwater. She said her patients needed her more than our possessions did. The crowd applauded again, and Eleanor smiled modestly, quickly taking her seat. Judge Hall felt increasingly uncomfortable. The woman he had fined so harshly was clearly a town hero. He had seen only the rule-breaker, not the person. As the evening wound down, Judge Hall found himself alone at the bar. He ordered another scotch, hoping it might ease his growing sense of shame. Rough day in court, Richard? Asked George Wilson, his old friend and the town's former mayor. You could say that, Judge Hall replied, taking a sip of his drink. I heard about the Peters case. Or Thompson case, I should say. George lowered his voice. Bit harsh, wasn't it? Judge Hall bristled. The law is the law, George. I don't make exceptions. Even during a state of emergency? George raised an eyebrow. Even for someone who probably saved lives by staying close to the hospital? How was I supposed to know who she was? Judge Hall said defensively. George gave him a long look. That's just it, Richard. You're supposed to see the person standing in front of you, not just the rule they broke. The words hit Judge Hall hard. As he looked across the room and saw Eleanor laughing with a group of elderly residents, he realized his friend was right. Somewhere along his 30 years on the bench, he had stopped seeing people and started seeing only cases and statutes. For the first time in a very long time, Judge Richard Hall wondered if perhaps he had made a serious mistake. Judge Hall spent a restless night after the dinner. Images of Eleanor standing in his courtroom mixed with the stories he had heard about her work during the flood. He tossed and turned, his conscience troubling him more than it had in years. The next morning, he arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. Instead of preparing for the day's cases, he pulled out the file on Eleanor Peters. He read through it carefully, noting the dates of the parking violations. All of them coincided with the height of the flood emergency. With a sigh, he picked up the phone and dialed the hospital. "This is Judge Richard Hall. I need to speak with Dr. Phillips, please." 20 minutes later, he was looking at a copy of the hospital's emergency protocol, signed by Dr. Phillips. It clearly instructed staff to use the restricted parking areas during the crisis. At the bottom was a note indicating that proper permissions had been requested from the town council. Judge Hall's next call was to the town clerk's office. After being transferred twice, he finally spoke with Agnes, who had worked there for over 40 years. "The flood permits?" "Oh yes, we received several emergency requests from the hospital," Agnes confirmed. "I took them myself and passed them to Roger for processing." "And were they processed?" Judge Hall asked. "Well, that's the thing," Agnes said with a heavy sigh. Poor Roger's house was one of the first to flood. He rushed home to save what he could and then ended up in the hospital himself with pneumonia. Those papers were probably sitting on his desk when the first floor flooded. "We lost quite a bit of paperwork." Judge Hall thanked her and hung up, rubbing his temples. The pieces were falling into place. The hospital had indeed requested proper permission. Due to the chaos of the emergency, the paperwork had never been processed. And in his rigid adherence to documented proof, he had found a woman who was only trying to help others during a crisis. By lunchtime, Judge Hall had made his decision. He signed an order vacating Eleanor's fines and removing the violations from her record. But it didn't feel like enough. After finishing his docket for the day, he drove to the mayor's office. His stomach felt tight as he asked the secretary if Mayor Thompson was available. "He's just finishing a meeting, sir. Would you like to wait?" Judge Hall nodded and took a seat in the waiting area. Through the glass walls of the office, he could see the mayor talking with several people around a conference table. Maps were spread out, probably plans for rebuilding the flood-damaged areas. When the meeting ended and the others filed out, Mayor Thompson looked surprised to see the judge waiting. He gestured for him to come in. "Judge Hall. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I was hoping to speak with both you and Mrs. Thompson." "Mrs. Peters," Judge Hall said. "Is that possible?" The mayor studied him for a moment, then picked up his phone. "Eleanor? Are you still at the hospital? Judge Hall is here and would like to speak with us both. Can you come over?" 20 minutes later, Eleanor arrived. She looked tired but composed in her nurse's uniform. She took a seat beside her husband, across from the judge. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Judge Hall began. He placed a folder on the desk between them. "I've spent the morning investigating your case, Mrs. Peters. I vacated all fines and removed the violations from your record." Eleanor's eyebrows raised slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor. But that's not why I'm here," Judge Hall continued. He took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. A sincere one." The couple exchanged a glance. "I've been a judge in this town for 30 years, he said, his voice softer than usual. "Somewhere along the way, I started caring more about rules than about people. I forgot that laws exist to serve the community, not the other way around." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Judge Hall. Please, let me finish," he said. "Last night at the dinner, I learned about your extraordinary service during the flood. I heard how you worked for days without rest, how you lost your own home but kept working to save others. And I realized that in my courtroom, I didn't see any of that. I only saw 7 parking tickets. He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. The legal system should recognize context and circumstances. It should see the whole person, not just the infraction. I failed to do that, and I am truly sorry. Eleanor's expression softened. Thank you for saying that, Judge. It means a lot. Mayor Thompson still looked skeptical. While I appreciate the apology, I have to wonder, would you have reconsidered if you hadn't discovered who Eleanor was married to? Judge Hall nodded slowly. That's a fair question. And honestly, perhaps not. Meeting Eleanor as the mayor's wife made me look closer at the case, yes. But what really changed my perspective was learning about her as a person, hearing about her dedication to this town and its people. That would have moved me regardless of who she was married to. Mayor Thompson studied Judge Hall's face for a moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you mean that, Richard. But you must understand that many people in this town have stories worth hearing, stories that never get told in your courtroom. You're right, Judge Hall admitted. And that's why I'm here for more than just an apology. He straightened in his chair, gathering his courage. I've been thinking about this all day. What happened with Mrs. Peters has shown me a serious flaw in our local justice system. I want to propose a community justice program. Eleanor tilted her head. What kind of program? One that takes into account the whole person and the context of minor infractions, Judge Hall explained, warming to his subject. For non-violent offenses, we could consider community service instead of fines, especially for first-time offenders. We could create a citizen advisory board to review special circumstances, like what happened during the flood. Mayor Thompson leaned forward, interested despite himself. That's quite a change from your usual approach, Judge. It's time for a change, Judge Hall said firmly. I've seen too many people struggle to pay fines they can't afford. I've seen good people get caught in the system because of one mistake or unfortunate circumstance. Eleanor was watching him closely. And what made you change your mind after all these years? Judge Hall met her gaze directly. You did, Mrs. Peters. Seeing someone who had given so much to the community standing in my courtroom, being treated like just another case number, it made me question everything about how I've been administering justice. A silence fell over the office. Through the window, they could see workers repairing flood damage in the town square. It won't be easy, Mayor Thompson finally said. There will be resistance from traditional thinkers in town. I'm counting on your support, Judge Hall replied. Both of you. Especially you, Mrs. Peters. Your perspective as both a healthcare worker and someone who's been through the system would be invaluable. Eleanor exchanged a look with her husband, then turned back to the judge. What exactly are you asking of me? I'd like you to head the Citizen Advisory Board, Judge Hall said. Help me design a more compassionate approach to justice in Hillsbridge. Eleanor sat back, surprised. You want me to work with you? After what happened? Precisely because of what happened, Judge Hall insisted. You saw firsthand how the system failed. You can help fix it. For the first time since he'd met her, Eleanor smiled fully at him. I think that might be possible, Judge Hall. Over the next few weeks, Judge Hall and Eleanor began working together. They met regularly at the courthouse after hours, drafting proposals for the new community justice program. The judge was impressed by Eleanor's practical insights and genuine concern for the town's more vulnerable residents. Many people can't afford even small fines, she explained one evening as they worked. A parking ticket might mean choosing between paying the fine and buying groceries that week. Judge Hall nodded, remembering the many times he had seen people in his courtroom literally counting out dollars and coins to pay their fines. He had always viewed it as simply the consequence of breaking the law. Now he was starting to see it differently. What if we had a sliding scale, he suggested. Based on income? Eleanor smiled. Now you're thinking like someone who sees the whole person, not just the offense. By the 4th week, they had a comprehensive proposal ready to present to the town council. Mayor Thompson had scheduled it as the main agenda item for the next meeting. The night before the council meeting, Judge Hall sat alone in his study at home. On his desk were photographs of his 30 years on the bench. Awards for his service. Newspaper clippings praising his tough stance on crime. He had always been proud of his reputation for being strict but fair. Now he wondered if he had only been strict. Had he really been fair all these years? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Eleanor. "I just wanted to make sure you're ready for tomorrow," she said. "The council can ask tough questions." "I'm ready," he assured her. "But I've been thinking, are we going far enough with this program?" "What do you mean?" Judge Hall took a deep breath. "I've been reviewing some of my past cases. There are people I find who might deserve reconsideration under our new guidelines. Maybe we should include a provision for reviewing recent cases." There was a pause on the line, then Eleanor's voice came through, warm with approval. "Now that, Judge Hall, is true justice." The town hall was packed for the council meeting. People stood along the walls and crowded the back of the room. Word had spread about the new community justice program, and it seemed everyone in Hillsbridge had an opinion. Judge Hall sat at the front table beside Eleanor. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order from his position at the center of the council table. "Tonight we'll be hearing a proposal from Judge Richard Hall and Mrs. Eleanor Peters Thompson regarding changes to our local justice system," the mayor announced. "Judge Hall, you have the floor." Judge Hall approached the podium, adjusting his glasses nervously. He had spoken in front of crowds countless times, but never like this, never proposing something that went against his own long-standing approach to justice. "Thank you, Mayor Thompson and council members," he began. "For 30 years, I have served as a judge in this town. I've always believed in following the letter of the law. Rules are rules, I would say. But the recent flood crisis showed me something important. Sometimes the letter of the law fails to serve its spirit." He glanced at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. "The community justice program we're proposing tonight has 3 main components," Judge Hall continued. "First, a citizen advisory board to review special circumstances in minor offense cases. Second, community service options instead of fines for certain violations. And third, a review of recent cases where the punishment may have been too harsh given the circumstances." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not what they expected from the town's strictest judge. "Why the sudden change of heart, Judge?" called out Mr. Barton, the hardware store owner known for his skeptical views. Judge Hall took a deep breath. "A wise person recently showed me that justice isn't just about punishing rule breakers. It's about serving the community. It's about seeing the whole person standing before you, not just their offense." He gestured toward Eleanor. Mrs. Peters Thompson would like to share her own perspective now. Eleanor took his place at the podium. "Many of you know me from the hospital. Some of you might have heard about my recent experience in court over parking tickets during the flood emergency." She smiled slightly. "What you might not know is how that experience has led to an unexpected partnership." She explained how she and Judge Hall had been working together on the proposal, how they had researched other towns with similar programs, and the positive outcomes they had seen. "Change is hard," Eleanor acknowledged. "But sometimes it's necessary. This program isn't about being soft on crime. It's about being smart about justice." When they finished presenting, the council opened the floor for public comments. To Judge Hall's surprise, many spoke in favor of the program. Teachers, business owners, and ordinary citizens shared stories of times when they felt the system had been too harsh or inflexible. Mrs. Roberts, an elderly woman who taught piano lessons, stood with the help of her cane. "Last winter, my grandson got a ticket for not clearing snow from the sidewalk in front of my house. He was working 2 jobs and helping me after my hip surgery. He couldn't pay the fine, and it just kept growing with late fees. A program like this would have helped someone who was trying his best in a difficult situation." Not everyone supported the idea. The town's former prosecutor argued that consistent punishment was essential for deterrence. A few others worried about fairness if some people received different consequences than others. After 2 hours of discussion, Mayor Thompson called for a vote. The council members looked around at each other, then one by one raised their hands in support. The resolution passed 5-2. "Congratulations, Judge Hall," Mrs. Peters Thompson, Mayor Thompson said. "You have 6 months to implement the program and report back on its effectiveness." As people filed out of the town hall, many stopped to shake hands with Judge Hall and Eleanor. The judge felt a new sense of purpose, different from anything he had experienced in his long career. 6 months later, Judge Hall stood outside the newly painted door of the Community Justice Center. Inside, Eleanor was training the Citizen Advisory Board members. A diverse group that included a teacher, a retired police officer, a small business owner, and a college student. Judge Hall watched through the window as Eleanor explained the review process. Her face was animated with passion for their shared vision. He remembered their first meeting in his courtroom, how differently he had seen her then. Mayor Thompson walked up beside him. "Quite a change from a year ago, isn't it?" Judge Hall nodded. "The program's success has exceeded my expectations. 57 cases reviewed, 42 resolved through community service rather than fines. And compliance rates are actually higher than before. And the parking ticket lady and the stern judge became partners in justice reform," Mayor Thompson said with a smile. "Who would have thought?" "She taught me something important," Judge Hall said quietly. "True justice sees the whole person, their circumstances, their intentions, their character. Not just the rules they broke." As they watched, Eleanor spotted them and waved them inside. Judge Hall felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he walked toward the door. His greatest achievement in 30 years on the bench wasn't the cases he had won or the strict sentences he had handed down. It was this moment when he had learned to see beyond the rules to the people they were meant to serve.